I'm excited to talk to you about today's show, our Coffee Talk, episode 4, honoring our ancestors, burial grounds, cemeteries, and final resting places. Our guest today will be Dr. Antoinette Harrell, Dr. Tara Dudley, Diana Hernandez, and Jennifer Blanks. And we'll learn more about these brilliant women a little while later. But first, I want to tell you about Texas Freedom Colonies Project. Founded in 2014, the Texas Freedom Colonies Project is a social justice research initiative. And we have 3 goals. We are first dedicated to locating and telling the stories of origin and decline of African American settlements in the state of Texas. We're then committed to using that data and leveraging that data to co-develop and co-plan for community resilience and preservation and revitalization with these communities. And we do that based here at Texas A&M University, but we are a statewide organization committed to the futures of Black free spaces throughout the state and throughout the United States. How do we do that? We do it through our atlas and online survey. This is the way that we invite the public, all of you, to share the stories that are not in history books, they're not in your libraries, but they're in the memories and the hearts of our seniors, our elders, and people in our communities who know exciting, innovative ways to keep communities alive, but we've yet to record those innovations in a way that makes them available to others. And so the Texas Freedom Colonies Project is committed to uplifting those stories, those innovations, those approaches to preserving our communities that have not been recorded or integrated into planning history and planning and preservation practice. And I do want to say that if not for cemeteries, there would be no Texas Freedom Colonies Project. I had 2 encounters in cemeteries that informed the importance and the centrality of burial grounds to our work. The first was in my community cemetery, in 5th Street, which is in Stafford, Fort Bend County. That cemetery has my ancestors interred there who were formerly enslaved on plantations in Fort Bend County. And that cemetery was a place in which I encountered an individual who turned to me and said, we're not related, but we're related through slavery. And it was that consciousness of the intensity and significance of the ties to our past that are in our cemeteries that really led me down the path of not only wanting to tell those stories, but to understand why so many of these places were neglected, built on top of, and destroyed in the course of development in the state. And the other encounter was during 2014, where I went to a homecoming. Many of us know about homegoings, but homecomings for African Americans in many rural communities are the spaces and places in which we honor the ancestors and the founders of communities. And one of the things that happens during these homecomings is raising money and finding ways to make sure that cemeteries are preserved through mutual aid. So we hear all these things about mutual aid and emergent theory and all these exciting new things that people do. But back to the time of the Great Migration, since that time, African Americans have been engaging in mutual aid to protect their cemeteries. And so I grew impatient with not enough attention to this innovation. And I got really interested in how we make it known not only that people are doing this, but this should inform the way that we do planning and preservation of cemeteries from here forward for all of our communities. And with that, we're going to talk to some of the people doing that innovative work, doing that innovative study on how we can map, locate, preserve, and bring attention to the plight of African American cemeteries, not one by one, but in total. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to doctoral student Skylar Carter and host of today's Coffee Talk. Skylar?
Good morning, everybody. Again, like Dr. Roberts mentioned, my name is Skylar Carter, and I am really happy to be with all of our guests today. We are This is our monthly broadcast for Coffee Talk, and we are going to talk about the current state of Black cemeteries today, a little bit about ancestral connections to these spaces and burial grounds, and then also some of the methods of preservation that our guests use to advance their research. And the interview will be set up into two parts, and we invite everyone who is watching, all of our viewers right now. We invite you to put your comments as you're listening, to put your comments in below, so that we can ask our guests whatever you would like towards the end of the interview. So I do want you to think of some things that you want to ask our guests, and we will ask them for you. Um, I want to give a little bit of background for each of our guests, and I'm going to ask that, as I'm reading, just give a little wave. So I know our names are on our screens, but just so people know who I'm talking about, just give a little wave so they can know who you are. Our first guest, Dr. Tara Dudley, is a lecturer in the School of Architecture at the University of Texas at Austin. She obtained her doctorate in architectural history and master's degree in historic preservation from UT Austin, and holds a bachelor's degree in art history from Princeton University. She specializes in architectural history and historic preservation. She teaches interior design history, American architecture, and African American experiences in architecture. Her research focuses on 19th and earliest 20th century American architecture and design, specifically the undertold and untold contributions of African Americans. Her work explores preservation issues on local, regional, and national levels. She has been involved in various aspects of historical research, historic context preparation, and interpretive planning, and consults on cultural resource management projects across the nation. Her research methodology includes creative utilization of archival resources and conducting oral histories. Dr. Dudley has increasingly incorporated genealogical research, including the use of cemetery records and documentation, to identify enslaved and free builders of color and to expand on knowledge about the occupants of historic buildings and communities. She applied this methodology to her study of the architectural activities of New Orleans free people of color. Her book, Building New Orleans, Free People of Color and Their Influence, is scheduled to be released next summer. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Dudley. Dr.
You're very welcome.
Dr. Antoinette Harrell is a renowned genealogist and historian. She is the producer and host of Nurturing Our Roots genealogy television talk show and the author of several books. Her work has been featured in many media publications on the subjects of peonage and involuntary servitude research. Vice Documentary has produced a documentary film on her peonage research. She is committed to preserving the oral histories and images of African American people, cultural, schools, churches, businesses, civic organizations, and of prominent and influential African American families and leaders of the Louisiana, Florida parishes. Dr. Harrell is a documentary producer, a community activist that addresses social injustice. She has recorded 9 African American cemeteries in 2 Louisiana parishes and submitted the files to the U.S. Gen Web Archives for genealogical research. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Harrell. Diana Hernandez has taught in Texas for 10 years and has been an independent researcher on issues of language, diversity, and preservation since 2014. In the summer of 2019, Diana conducted research with the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico City. The initiative, titled Sites of Memory of the Slave Routes in Latin America, focuses on the preservation of sites related to Afro-Mexican history and culture, and is part of an overarching effort by UNESCO. Her work locally and abroad highlights the preservation of cultural landscapes related to the history of racial violence. She is currently documenting and researching the history of a Mexican and Mexican-American cemetery in Travis County area, as well as additional sites in Houston as a part of her master's thesis. And she is a student at UT Austin. Thank you for joining us, Deanna. And lastly, last but not least, we are joined by Jennifer Blanks. Jennifer is a New Orleans native and holds a MS in Environmental Science from Jackson State University. She is currently a third-year PhD student in Urban and Regional Science at Texas A&M University. Her research interests include historic preservation of African American cemeteries and the impacts of natural disasters on graves using GIS. She is responsible for cemetery assessment, mapping, and managing the Atlas 2.0 geodatabase for the Texas Freedom Colonies project. She also serves as liaison to Black Girls Mapping and Esri Initiative, and is the founder of the online platform, the Cemetery Sista. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Blanks. So before we really get started, I do want to mention again that we will have a Q&A period at the end of the segment where you will be able to, or our guests will be able to answer the question that our viewers have posed to them. So with that, I hope everybody has their, beverages ready, so we can get started. So as Dr. Roberts, did you have something you wanted to?
Oh, just really quickly, before we dig in, at the very end of our conversation with our illustrious guest, we will have some more exciting announcements about our work in cemeteries and our partnerships. And we'll talk more in depth about ways that everyone can get involved in working with the project, with the Texas Freedom Colonies project. So we'll talk about that later.
Perfect. So, so as Dr. Roberts mentioned, cemeteries and burial grounds have long held a substantial place in minority communities, and they have a unique way of bringing us together. And so for all of us, as scholars, cemeteries are either our main subject of our research or provide, invaluable information as a resource for our research. So I want to pose this question. Well, today we're going to be taking it beyond Texas. I know we focus, of course, we are the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, but this week or this month, we're going to be taking it to more of a regional level, and we're going to be talking a lot about Louisiana and Texas and other areas that our guests are doing research in. So I want to pose this to everybody, and it may be a little bit tough, but in one sentence, can you give your perspective on the state of Black cemeteries in your area? And please tell us where your geographical area research is. And we can start with you, Dr. Harrell.
Okay, I live in Tangipahoa Hope Parish, so my emphasis in Tangipahoa Hope Parish and St. Helena. I have found a lot of abandoned cemeteries, and that is something that is very disheartening to me, because the cemeteries held a very sacred meaning to my family and to a lot of our ancestors who has passed on, and to see the state in which a lot of the cemeteries that I have recorded, outside of the private cemeteries, that is, the church cemeteries, but the public cemeteries and some church cemeteries do need a lot of attention in preservations.
Thank you. Deanna.
So similar to what Dr. Harrell said, well, the Black cemeteries that I research are in Fort Bend County, and they are in an extreme state of neglect. They're endangered, and they're often built over, and they're in desperate need of the community to work together to preserve them. But it also takes researchers like us to help the community in doing that.
Jennifer.
So my study site is in Deep East Texas, and the two communities that I'm working with, their cemeteries are pretty much inaccessible. They're overgrown with vegetation and weeds, and they don't really know who to get in contact with to help them kind of care for their cemeteries. And then there's also an issue of burial records, and the cemetery caretakers have lost the burial records or it's misplaced. So that makes new interments difficult to properly map and lay out. And then also they're located in a floodplain. And Texas is in recent years, and probably next week, going to be impacted by hurricanes and constant flooding. And so yeah, a lot of issues going on there.
Yeah, Dr. Dudley.
I am, my primary research on cemeteries has occurred in Austin. And so we do have cemeteries that are more in the public eye, if you will, but I also conducted research on cemeteries in New Orleans. I'm a native of Louisiana. And I think it goes hand in hand in how I feel about the state of cemeteries with the lack of maintenance, whether it be in the archival record of those cemeteries or the actual physical maintenance of cemeteries that our other guests have talked about, and just the overall lack of information and the lack of use and ignorance about cemeteries. And really, I think they're underutilized resources in overall history, architectural history, in the manner that other source materials are used. And so I think if we combine a lot of these efforts and information, that might help to inform or improve the physical maintenance, how the archival record of cemeteries is maintained. And so putting all of that together.
And so as you guys said, you're looking at areas in Louisiana and as well as Texas, and I can also speak from the Oklahoma perspective that Black cemeteries, African American cemeteries in Oklahoma are struggling as well. And so, when we, you think about this lack of maintenance, do any of you have like a I guess a perspective on why that is and why our cemeteries have been left behind in a sense?
I would like to expand upon that, please. I remember as a child, there was always a cemetery committee in the church. And those men and women took that position very seriously. And as they aged out and couldn't do it anymore, there was not any new younger people to take their places. So I think that we have done ourselves an injustice by not recruiting other young people and sharing the oral history with them about the cemetery. And that's what I'm finding in most churches, that at one time, the church buried people that was a member of that church. And now the churches are selling plots in the cemetery. And so it's like the meaning is not the same. And so we have to find a way to get the younger people involved with preservations, first of all, to understand the history of our ancestors who are in the cemeteries.
I love that. Yeah. Does anybody else want to speak to, bringing in the younger generation? Because
I think that's absolutely correct. In thinking about this talk and some of my earliest encounters with a cemetery and relatives in contact with the ancestors was because of the town that I grew up in outside of Lafayette, Louisiana, a little town called Broussard. We would go and play in the church school playground all the time. And to get there from my grandmother's house, we crossed this field that was empty at the time, that was part of the church property, and would traverse through the cemetery. And so we would encounter literally our ancestors, aunts and uncles and whatnot. And it was almost kind of a ritual that on the way to the playground, even when we didn't have the adults with us, we would stop, or at least I would, and pay homage, revere the ancestors, say hello, say a little prayer, and then go off about our little business on the playground. And so just having that direct contact and that direct knowledge, and maybe that helped to inform some of the kind of work that I'm interested in as far as historic preservation and the incorporation of cemeteries into my work, but I think that's absolutely correct. And then of course, as people move away from the hometowns and they lose that knowledge and that contact. And so it's a matter on the one hand of going back, but even within the communities that are maintained and are still there, to encourage our youth to understand the importance of cemeteries in the same way that we look at other archival material, for example, books and other physical records, and to understand those as records really of a different sort.
Right, right. And it's often, cemeteries are often that, last remaining piece of cultural heritage in a community. As you said, like when people move away, a lot of the again, I'm speaking from my Oklahoma perspective, but the Black towns of Oklahoma, the populations have declined. People move away to get jobs and this and that, but they do come home, and often, the cemeteries and their ancestors are all that they have to come back to. So it really is something special to come back and commune with the ancestors. Deanna or Jennifer, do you have any response? I don't want to cut anybody out.
I did want to mention one thing. As an educator at the last school where I taught at, I started a preservation and archaeology student society, and it was I taught at the high school level, and the interest from the student population was unexpected. I didn't think that there would be so many students interested in preservation work, specifically researching cemeteries, but they do. They want to engage with the local history. They want to engage with their roots. This was a predominantly African American and Latinx high school, and we were in a predominantly African American and Latinx neighborhood. And so the sites were all related to that history, the history of the community. And the students just took ownership of it. They took ownership of researching the local cemeteries, presenting about it. And we really do underestimate the potential of our youth, of our younger generations, and their willingness to engage with this type of work. Because they have almost like this thirst for knowledge of their roots and where they come from. And it was one proof of this was they would go home and tell their parents. They would go home and they would tell me the next day when they came to school, they were like, I told my parents about the history of my community. And to me, that was very powerful, because I was planting seeds, like little seeds in them. And they were just watching them grow and seeing them, like they would tell me on their own time that they would go to the genealogy center to do their own research. And I had one student tell me, you know what, this work led me to research my family history. And they would go with their parents to the genealogy center to trace their own roots. And so it just really took on a life of its own that I didn't expect.
That's beautiful. That is really beautiful. And I think it's like a lot of students don't realize that that's an option, that that they're interested, for one, and that they could turn it into a career that they are passionate about, and that means a lot to them. I can kind of speak to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Dudley mentioned a moment ago, like, when you're visiting that cemetery, going to the playground, and you remember those moments. I remember moments with my grandmother, like her telling me about family history and just wanting to be around her just so she could talk. She's a talker, but, just hearing her talk about her family, her parents, and just everything, how passionate she was. And I think that definitely has played into why I am where I am and why I do the research that I do as well. Yeah. So when we talk about, cemeteries and ancestral connection, I know that it is often, very personal, very spiritual to us in many ways. And I will mention, Dr. Roberts as a as a Fort Bend County native, as she mentioned, she has a unique perspective on connecting with these kind of areas and discussing discoveries such as the Sugarland 95. In February of 2018, the bodies of 90, and for those who are not familiar with the Sugarland 95, in February of 2018, the bodies of 95 formerly incarcerated men and women who died in the late 19th and 20th century were discovered beneath a school construction site. Unearthing this cemetery has forced the city of Sugarland and Fort Bend County to confront the difficult heritage of convict leasing and the community's long, dark history of labor exploitation. And Dr. Roberts, I just want to open that up for you to give any comments on that before we dig into it.
Yes, I think that those of us who are in urban planning, especially, or anybody who works with the built environment in Texas knows that we're growing fast. And, the Sugarland 95 are but one example of what happens when we have runaway, irresponsible development that looks at expediency over equity and ethics. And so I think it's important as we talk about the historical dimensions that we talk about the very present day issues that intersect with our preservation work, which is growth, sprawl, disaster, all of those things. And so I think the Sugarland 95, in my experience, having grown up there, near the sugar refinery, born behind the sugar refinery, all of those bring to the fore how all of these places, they're right beneath our feet. They're all around us every day. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Scott. Unmute, ma'am. You want to unmute? There you go. Got excited.
As I mentioned, communities are being forced to address these histories that have long been, pushed to the side and, hidden, trying to cover up. And so each of these communities have a different way of addressing these issues. And so I'll pose this to each of you. Can you touch on the acknowledgement of Black space in your area? How are your communities, whether that's where you are living right now or where you're from, how are these areas addressing these type of situations and just, Black space and Black structures?
Well, in Tangipahoa and St. Helena, there is not one African American genealogy society. So first of all, to work in the community to raise awareness of these type of things that need to be documented is the very first thing that I had to do. And then to partnership with leaders in the community, some of the pastors, the local funeral homes, especially the local funeral homes, because they're the ones that will know all the cemeteries. They know the conditions in which the cemeteries are in. And to meet with family members and the leaders of the churches, the leaders in the community over the public cemeteries, to let them know that there is some crisis on hand. There is some of the cemeteries in St. Helena that is yet in the woods that has been there maybe 40, 50 years and you can't even access it. And so there's some companies that has purchased the land and it's very impossible. And I hear a lot of that our ancestors are still enslaved on places that we cannot access to visit, to pay homage to them. And that's a big thing that I see in the rural communities as well, not having access to the land or the cemeteries because someone bought the land and they have to grant you the right. So it's still very challenging, but I don't see the sacredness of the cemeteries. And that's the thing that we really have to really get beyond, because some people believe that to pay homage to the ancestors, meaning you're going into a dark area and that you are trying to communicate with the dead. And, it's so many things that have this misinformed information about the cemeteries. And so we have to break that, because you're not communicating with the dead. I believe that I am my ancestor. You know, my ancestors are here. They are here in each one of us. And they want us to remember them and to reflect upon them and keep those places sacred like they are supposed to be, because we are one day going to go that way. And I always say to my family, if you're going to bury me in a neglected cemetery, I'd much rather you cremate me, because too many cemeteries, too many family members are dying and there's no headstones. The graves are sinking. It's just total neglect. And for sometimes no one ever go back there until someone else pass away. And then they'll go back to the cemetery and they'll walk the cemetery and say, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, but nothing ever really happens.
I'd like to jump in on this one. So one of my study sites is the Texas Freedom Colony in Shankleville, Texas, Shankleville Freedom Colony. And they actually have their founders buried in their cemetery. And so with that being said, they have this sense of obligation really to go and maintain the cemetery, to go and visit the cemetery, but they also advocate for the other cemetery in their community that isn't as well maintained or isn't easily accessible, and doing a lot of work within their own community, but then partnering with the Texas Freedom Colonies Project and seeing, you know, how can their cemetery be improved. One of the issues they have is accessibility for elders in their community, so their elders can go and visit their ancestors, their parents, their grandparents. So that's definitely one way. And then being from New Orleans, we're pretty known for our cemeteries, just the architecture of it. Almost like the party atmosphere that we have to celebrate our loved ones, and just being able to maintain that cultural practice and going to visit our ancestors in that form of having the second line band and the Mardi Gras Indians, that's really an added bonus and incentive in wanting to keep the youth engaged in basically reclaiming or maintaining our space in that sense.
It's very, very interesting talking about Shankleville and, that responsibility to maintain. Whereas, the community that I research, the history of the community is not really known. So it's like either the history, there's something to really pay homage to. But when that history is unknown, which is what we do with the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, and making these communities known, putting them on the map, and highlighting the history and the significance of these areas.
I just want to add really quickly, highlighting the significance of these areas and the fact that these rituals of returning is proof that people still consider the places home, that these are places in which they still own property, and these are alive, active, important places. So they're not just about the past or what was or over, but it's proof that there's a diaspora who return to these places to be buried. They might have been in Houston all their lives, or Dallas all their lives, or New Orleans all their lives, or wherever, but they're going to return and be buried back at these places. These are home for so many African Americans.
Right. Dr. Dudley, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, being able to tie the historic aspect, the spiritual aspect of cemeteries to the present is also another way that we can keep them, in the public eye, keep them current, if you will, and understanding their importance as opposed to something that's otherworldly or mysterious in a sense. In a place like Austin, of course, which is a metropolis, but we did have freedom colonies that are basically have been subsumed by other neighborhoods and gentrification and so on and so forth. But you get a cemetery like Oakwood Cemetery, which was the city's first cemetery with its segregated burial area for African Americans. But then you have places like Evergreen Cemetery, which was primarily for African Americans. And both of these cemeteries have been very well maintained. And I will be part of future projects at Oakwood Cemetery to, explore certain themes that might help us know more about the individuals and I identify those individuals so we have more of a connection between the present and the past in those spaces so that we're able to pay homage to those people, whether they were builders, for example, or businessmen. And so the staff at Oakwood Cemetery is moving toward creating that kind of public programming. And so people are understanding of the cemetery, of the people who were buried there, whether they're your personal ancestors or not. Encourage that historical knowledge of these places and their importance in African American history in the absence of the Freedom Colony and the community that does not exist anymore.
That's wonderful. So when we mentioned, ancestral connections, how have your own personal ancestral connections influenced your work? And I will start with Deanna this time.
So I'm from the same area that Dr. Roberts is from, Missouri City, Texas. And I became interested in cemetery work because growing up, I never learned the history of my community. It was never taught to me. And then as an educator, I felt a responsibility to help students learn the history of their community, because when I started doing that, it really helped me understand my community and why certain things were the way they were. Example, my neighborhood was built over part of a prison farm, and I never knew that. And literally 5 minutes from where my house is the prison farm cemetery. And so that was one of the first projects that I took on, was researching this prison farm cemetery that is tied to the Sugarland 95 prison farm. So the prison farm that I researched was one of the satellite work camps for Central Unit. And the community, I can guarantee if you knock on anyone's door, they're not going to know that their house was built over a prison farm. And so there's a disconnect that I'm working to kind of form a bridge between the community and the local history. Because the history is there. The history is all around us. The name of the prison farm is Blue Ridge. And down the street from Prison Farm Cemetery is an elementary school named Blue Ridge Elementary School. So it's an elementary school named after the prison farm. And it's just, the history is there, and we need to help the community make these connections because we deserve to know. We deserve to know what this history is. And so that's kind of what drives and what influences my work.
And I think the community will be interested in it. They may not be, wanting to go and get a doctorate or, to research it like we do, but I can guarantee just when I talk to my family about it, they're interested. They're just like, oh, like I didn't know that. They're going to keep that little nugget and probably share it with somebody else. And I really love that you said that we just, the community deserves to know the local history. I'll open that to anybody else.
I'll answer this one next. Interesting enough, or maybe not, but when my grandmother passed away in 2011, I found out that her husband was an embalmer at a funeral home that my family owned. And so I guess within the last year, after like sharing my research with my family members, and Sky is a witness, I found out that my family still owns this funeral home. My uncle is still a licensed embalmer, and my cousin is still a licensed embalmer because he owns the funeral home. And so it's just kind of full circle how my career or like my research is driven to cemeteries, but I didn't really know the full extent in which like my family arranges funerals and embalms, the deceased, and preps families to bury their loved one. Because initially, like my background is environmental science, so it's just kind of full circle. And knowing all of that today now, it's like, okay, I need to go home and collect some information, but I can't because of COVID. But you know, it's still good to have these new kinds of conversation with my family members and just listen to the stories that my uncle has to share. And if I'm describing a cemetery in the city that I haven't been to, and he's like, oh, that's right over there behind City Park. If you had such amount of money, that's where we had to bury you, you know. So it's definitely having that personal connection and learning about it now. It definitely helps, you know, propel me through my research. And then also just how cemeteries in New Orleans flood all the time, and just Louisiana in general, how the coffins are exhumed, and then just the difficulty of the reinterment process. Like Dr. Roberts said, a lot of us go back home to be buried, and I know like returning to Louisiana to be buried is something that I would like to do, but I also don't want to have to deal with knowing that my family might have a difficult time identifying who I am to reinter my remains. So having those connections and just witnessing how floods devastate cemeteries in Louisiana definitely keeps me grounded in my research.
My mother, for me, I was 9 years old, so as far as I can remember, my mom would always go back to the cemetery and, you know, whitewash the cemetery, put flowers on the cemetery, and maintain the cemetery. So she would take me and my 3 brothers, and I find right now it's still me and 2 of my brothers that often go to the family cemeteries and, you know, wash the graves off and put the flowers. But I always try to recruit new family members. And so now that I'm a grandmother, I'm taking my grandchildren with me. And so I take them to different cemeteries and I talk about those people, our ancestors, and what they meant to me, and pass those stories down, educating while working. And so that's a great way to keep the next generation involved with everything too. So I have to say it was my mom that really influenced my life with that, because she always talked about her aunts, her uncles, her grandparents, and it became personal for me. It inspired me a lot to record 9 cemeteries. We went up against the snakes. We went up against the holes in the ground. We just took it on. And that was another thing. My son helped to do that, and he was 12 years old. So it was a labor of love and passing on.
I can guarantee they're going to remember that. That is going to be a memory.
You know, I mentioned my personal connection with, you know, a very close and intimate encounter with the cemetery right there next to my grandmother's house. And the same thing on, you know, All Saints Day, going and putting flowers on the graves, making sure that everything was clean and nice. And my mom lives here in Texas now, but she's always, you know, in Stonewall, you know, they haven't put a tombstone on cousin so-and-so's grave or aunt so-and-so's grave. And so having that awareness and knowledge of the cemeteries and that personal connection, and the way that that's informed my work, you know, being from Louisiana, especially New Orleans, in places where we bury above ground. And so the cemeteries are known as cities of the dead. As an architectural historian, I think of cemeteries very much as artifacts, as I do any other kind of extant building or resource or structure, is tools for understanding about the people who lived and inhabited the other kinds of buildings that I'm studying. So I get excited when I'm looking, you know, and when I think about architectural history and I'm studying a building, it's just as important to me to know about the style and the form of the building, the people who live there and why they're living there and how they're living and inhabiting a space. And so it's important to me to know the people. And I get really excited in my research when I encounter cemetery records and probate records, and it really kind of helps solidify you know, these people and their presence, and that they were here and they did inhabit this particular space. And that's been really useful in encountering cemeteries and finding these individuals in the research that I've done on the free people of color in New Orleans, on African-American builders here in Austin, and people who have inhabited other historic structures that I've conducted research on across the country, but specifically in my work in Texas and Louisiana.
That's wonderful. And I think, yeah, I really appreciate you guys sharing your personal perspectives. We all kind of have that full circle moment, and it's really something special to take our work beyond folklore. You know, a lot of times people just hear stories about somebody that did this way back, but when we can provide that source of information, is really something special. So I want to remind our viewers to again put your comments in the place your comments in our comment section to and questions in our comment section, so that we can ask our guests once we get towards the end of our interview for the Q&A period. I want to kind of shift and talk about some of our research methods, how we all utilize different methods. I know we're all kind of in the same realm of research in a way, but we all creatively and utilize different things to carry out our research. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but how do we all use cemeteries to aid in the work that we all do to locate or pay homage to, you know, formerly enslaved ancestors? And you did kind of touch on this, Dr. Dudley, so I guess I'll start with you again. Like, give us just a little bit more detail about how you utilize cemeteries in your research.
Sure. Usually it starts with, you know, if I'm doing the history of the building, the chronology, and trying to create a chain of title of the owners and any other people that might have lived in a building or inhabited a space. Ancestry.com has become my best friends, and I can like literally go down a rabbit hole when doing research, and like some of the hints that get me the most excited are when I get these find a grave hints, because a lot of times it takes me to that database and I'm able to not only find that individual but other family members, really to create ties not only with the building studying but sometimes with the entire community. I might get some links and references to other people who are also interred in that cemetery that might have been part of the life of the person or the building that I'm studying. So it's been really, really fun, actually, conducting some of that kind of research, and just, you know, little hints sometimes that mean everything. And I'll give a specific example. Some of the work that I'm doing right now is researching what was the slave quarters building at the structure that is now called the Neil Cochran House Museum here in Austin. And that structure was built by a renowned white builder, Abner Cook, here in Austin. And one of the experts on Abner Cook, Dr. Kenneth Haferteep, messaged me when he found out that I was doing research on that building and said that he had encountered a name of a man, Thomas Hill, in the 1870 census, who may or may not have been connected to Washington and Mary Hill, which was the white couple that initially built this home or commissioned it in 1855. And we do know that Abner Cook had enslaved men who labored on his projects as builders and masons and so on and so forth. And he suggested that I do some more research into Thomas Hill, and luckily was able to find not only a newspaper article, one reference in the 1870s, which is really unusual for that time, but it listed Thomas Hill, a prosperous builder at this time. And so it gave me a little bit of information about his life. And then the cemetery gave me additional information about his life from that same find grave hint on Ancestry.com. It took me to Oakwood Cemetery, and the dates were a little bit off because it was the record in the cemetery was saying that he died in 1873, but this newspaper article was from 1875. So I said, oh no, I've got to go to Oakwood Cemetery. So my girls and I got in the car, we went to Austin. My older daughter was freaking out because she doesn't do cemeteries, but we're working on that. And I go up to the grave, and sure enough, it was just a misprint or a mistyping in the database. And this gentleman died in 1876, and I was able to tie a physical grave and record to this individual and a structure potentially that I'm researching. And it was also really interesting because, you know, these tombstones in a lot of cases, as we know, can be very elaborate. And we know that this man was skilled, that he was prosperous, as the newspaper article mentioned, because not only was it his tombstone, but it had carvings of a brick or stone, a trowel, and a plumb bob on it, so that we know that this man, Thomas Hill, was indeed a builder in Austin. And so I think that was one of my most recent, really exciting encounters with cemeteries, and a specific grave site in a cemetery here in Austin that is helping to inform some of my research on enslaved and freedmen builders in Austin in the 19th century.
Wow. I want to go and look at this headstone. That's
I couldn't take a picture, but yeah, I'll put it in the comments of the talk section, but it was really cool. I think I might have even screamed and went all crazy in the house when I found it. It's just, you know, one of those moments, the same as when you're in an archive and you open whatever volume and, you know, you see this information, this fact that you've been searching for. It was that same kind of feeling.
Oh, yeah.
So it's really exciting.
That is wonderful. Anybody else?
I'll add to that because my work in Austin unexpectedly ended up connecting with Dr. Dudley's work in the weirdest twist of all. But I'm not gonna talk forever. But basically, I researched a Mexican American cemetery in East Austin. It's called the San Jose Cemetery, and actually, my background is the second section of San Jose, if you can see it. It's unmarked, and obviously from the picture you can see it's very neglected. But I was researching the cemetery, the history of the cemetery, and I found out that from there's an archaeologist, I forgot his name, I'm running blank right now, but I'll post it in the comments. He wrote a book on the history of Montopolis, because the Montopolis is the neighborhood that the cemetery is in. And in it, he mentions that in a 16-year-old African-American teenager, donated land for the first section of the cemetery. And then this was in 1919. And so that led me to just question how a 16-year-old African-American girl in 1919 donated land for a Mexican-American cemetery. So that led to me discovering, researching her roots. I was able to trace her family back to a local plantation whose slave quarters were built by Abner Cook as well, which is the slave quarter, like the architect that built Dr. Dudley's slave quarters as well. And so I reached out to her, and now we're trying to figure out how to collaborate on this history to kind of form a bigger picture of the community, right? Because it's not just about the Mexican and Mexican-American cemetery. There's a shared history there, right? And so that was just, for me, is very like just unexpected twist, like all the time researching the cemetery. But yeah, genealogy is a major factor in it. Like you have to be able to navigate genealogy, and that just gives you a lot of information about the history of the cemetery and the area.
Yeah, genealogy is very important to, cemeteries are very important to genealogy, because we just couldn't do I guess research our family history without going to the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
That's the story I'm working on right now. As they would say, there's two sets of Richardsons. I don't believe there's two sets of Richardsons. I believe that, back in that time period, people had a lot of children. There was something that took place and families kind of broke apart. But I have these two men who I suspect are brothers, and the headstones are basically telling me a story because it's the same headstones, different cemeteries. The AME Church, one is Rocky Hill, one is Black Creek. And so now I am at the point of suggesting that the two Richardsons take the DNA test. But funeral programs, the churches, the cemeteries has played a major role in helping me to connect the dots. In the African American community, funeral programs is a must. Everybody go to a funeral, give me one, and that has really helped me a great deal. And that's another part of the history that we must focus on in the African American community is the funeral programs, because the funeral programs tell you a lot about a person's life. There's the children, there's the pallbearers who are always connected. So there's a relationship. And my mother passed away about 4 months ago right now. And my mom was just like the person who really got me started. My mother had over 100 obituaries. And so I inherit those obituaries and I put them in the collection at Southeastern University because I know how important those collections was. So what I did before I reposited them into Southeastern, I blogged about them and I put them online electronically. So if anybody wants to find their family member in those areas, they would be able to find them. And on the back of it, the interment is the cemetery. So if that person want to know where their family is buried at, it's there.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and add to it. I just pulled my grandmother's obituary out of my notebook. But yeah, I have to echo how useful these public databases like Ancestry, Find a Grave, GenWeb, like these backdoor websites, how important they are in our research. Just recently, I was working on my own genealogy with my maternal grandparents and wanted to understand the complicated connection of where my grandfather is from and his lineage, and he's from Lutcher, Louisiana. And so I always grew up being told that my great grandfather was a white man. And I looked at a picture, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, he might can pass for one, but I ain't buying it. So like, let me get into this research. So I go and find a grave, genealogy, and then I'm like, something doesn't seem right because my grandfather there's one of him, and then there's another man who has his name. And so after talking to my mom, and I think our family members don't realize how much information they have that is so useful, and then they're like, oh, I already knew that. When you go to give them an update, it's like, okay, you could have told me this a few days ago and I could have saved myself a couple hours. But nonetheless, once we kind of maneuver through that, yeah, I mean, I don't want to put my family business out there, but I did get to the bottom of, his lineage, and it was all through these public sources, these public databases, and even using them with the Texas Freedom Colonies Project in my own dissertation. We get a lot of our information through the surveys, talking to community members, having meetings with them or phone calls or, anything like that. And then just kind of going through these databases almost as a fact check, just because that's the best evidence that we have, or collection rather, for our Black cemeteries. So yeah, just can't emphasize enough how much fun it's been using those websites and databases.
Yeah, these online, Find a Grave and everything is very helpful. But I mean, there's nothing like an oral history, and I think that what you just said about relatives not realizing how much information they can provide, and that's something that we definitely do not take for granted with the Texas Freedom Colonies Project. We have a lot of people interested in the project. I'm sure some of our viewers right now interested in volunteering, or know of a community that their family is from. And they're like, well, I don't really know much, and then they start talking, and boom, we got we got locations, we got churches, we got cemeteries, we got, this is where so and so used to live. This is so it's there's nothing like talking to community members, family members, and we do not want to underestimate the invaluable information that can provide. And so that kind of touches on our, one of the last questions that I have for you guys, the media methods and different, or technology rather. So if any of you guys want to touch on what kind of, or if you have used, or what kind of digital media methods have you used to advance your research and preserve different structures and stories. I'll just open that up to anybody.
I'll add to that. I'll start. So one of the things that I'm doing for the Austin Cemetery is creating a database of the people that are buried there. And I'm using the genealogy societies, the local genealogy societies have created lists of the people buried at the cemetery. And so I'm taking that list and I'm collecting all the death certificates for the people buried here, and plugging that death certificate information into the database so that I can start to pull up trends, see how many males, how many females, what they're dying of. And from that method, I was able to find out that a large portion of the people buried at the cemetery were dying from or as a result of former pandemics. And so this database is really helping to create a history for the community, but it also helps us see the connection between the past and the present, right? We're going through a pandemic right now. We've been through pandemics in the past, and the cemetery is giving us that picture of former pandemics, right? And so that's basically one of the things that I do, like digital media wise. Eventually I want to be able to put it on my blog, and have the community be able to manipulate the data so that they can pull data themselves. And so that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Wow. Thank you for that, because I know it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So far I've been able to collect about 140 death certificates and plug in data for 144 people, but one of the list has upwards of 400 people, a list of 400 people at the cemetery, and so I got a ways to go. But I'm just gonna keep working at it, and
That's it. That's
yeah.
it. Wonderful. Dr. Harrell?
Yeah, one of, I try to collect as much as I can from Ancestry. Let me tell you, all of you all know that this keep you up all night. 4 o'clock in the morning you realize, but Family Search, and they just added so many new records, and Ancestry are my best friends. And so some of your special guests have said, that there's a lot of hints inside of Find a Grave, and sometimes you find obituaries attached to it. But what I do to make sure to share that information is I use my blog and my different Facebook pages that I have created to help get information out there and to share it. And I get a lot of response from people that live abroad that would say, hey, thank you so much for posting this, because I did not have that information. And so sharing is one of the most important things that we can do, because when I started in 1994, I have watched information evolve so much that you can do a lot just from the internet. Before, you had to go out there. But it's very important to realize that whatever we collect, we must make a decision not to let it sit inside our homes, because it's not doing anybody any good. And what brought me to that point is when I had an aneurysm in the head 10 years ago. And one of my things was, I said, Heavenly Father, you bring me back. The one thing I want to do is clean my office out and get this research out of my house and move it into the universities or the libraries, so that it would be valuable to other people, because I knew that my 2 sons would not have. It probably wouldn't have meant that much to them, because it was boxes and boxes. When I tell you, it literally took me like 6 months to sort it all out, but I did. And every time I look at the indexes on the universe at Southeastern and the Amistad, that's a labor of love. So sharing that information, whether it be photographs, those debt records that you was talking about, Dr. Hernandez, thank you so much for that, because that's very tedious information, research that all of you are doing. But thank you for your contributions to the research of genealogy research and historical content. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a major thing, to not let our research, remain in our homes. And that's, part of my research is our grassroots archives, and using that information that is in our elders' homes, and in boxes, obituaries, and photo albums, everything like that, and using that to tell Black placemaking stories, and get the information out there about these communities. And so I think that's very, 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 very good point, Antoinette. So Jennifer, I didn't mean to cut you off if you were going to say anything.
Oh no, you're fine. As far as digital technology that I'm using, with the Freedom Colonies project, and I'm sure Dr. Roberts is going to make the announcement later, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but we are evolving the Atlas database and wanting to engage in a new way with the public. And so kind of crowdsourcing cemetery information through our cell phones. That's one big help. And then even with the Texas Freedom Colony Instagram page, that's been a huge success. So shout out to the team for managing those profiles. And then in my introduction, Skylar mentioned my personal social media platform, the Cemetery Sista, and the tagline is filling in the gaps of Black cemetery, Black figures or Black historians, Black people through Black cemeteries. Just because, again, as we're reiterating on this conversation, is how much information we find in cemeteries, and we don't know who our hidden heroes are because we just don't know, who they were, where they were. And so having that Instagram account has really opened up another network in connecting with other people and just learning about cemeteries and where they're located and how it's this trend of neglect through cemeteries, this trend of urban planners just kind of being reckless and bulldozing cemeteries or selling the property, and those new landowners are haphazardly disposing the bodies of those who are interned in these cemeteries. So definitely having like the social media presence definitely expands and broadens the conversation, and it gets people going. Like you said, Sky, you share this one fact of information, this one little gem, and everybody is sharing it within their own network. So definitely like technology and just getting information from community members through crowdsourcing, like I said, like on cell phones. So
I know we could have a whole episode about cemetery legislation and things being built over, cemeteries and burial grounds being built over. But if you can, Jennifer, since you've done a little bit more research in that, can you just give our viewers kind of the state of cemetery legislation or lack thereof, really?
Okay, so far I've looked at, so with the cemetery system, I'll usually feature a cemetery that's been neglected, or the burial of a significant person, or even an HBCU cemetery, because there's actually cemeteries on HBCU campuses. But every time I post a cemetery in a new state that I haven't studied, I go and look at their legislation to see what are the rules around the cemetery. I can't assume all states have the same policy. So at least I know in Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, New York, they have these legislations where if the cemetery is documented with the state, or even if you come across a burial, that burial site is not to be disturbed or disrupted or altered in any way that makes it inaccessible or destroyed. And so all the fact that these cemeteries that I'm featuring are in this state, like they're inaccessible, they're no longer there. It's just who are they applying this legislation for? What cemeteries are they really trying to protect? I'm actually working on a paper right now with Dr. Roberts and two of our colleagues at school, and I'm making a database for cemeteries in throughout Louisiana, and finding that a lot of these cemeteries on plantations or older, formerly plantations that are owned by these oil companies, they're literally cemeteries right in the middle of these oil refinery companies, and not even burials of our enslaved ancestors, but recent burials, like as recent as the 70s. And so it's like, how did this even happen? And again, who is this legislation meant to protect? So I don't know, it's really frustrating and aggravating, to be honest. I just can't imagine wanting to go and visit my loved one, but I need to make an appointment with a company that is surrounding the burial, and this is public property. Like, cemetery is public property for the most part, unless it is like private cemetery or private family cemetery. But these cemeteries that I'm featuring are public property. So that's the that's the issue with the legislation that I'm finding so far.
Thank you for that. And yeah, like I said, we could definitely have a whole whole episode, which we probably will, but I just wanted to, get that out there to let people know that, that's one reason why a lot of our minority cemeteries are in the state that they are in, unfortunately, and we are all trying to do something about that. And we're all doing our own little part. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I want to give you a moment if you have any parting words for our viewers, and what would you like them to know about Black cemeteries and the work that you're doing, if you would like to share.
I'll just reiterate what I said before, that the cemeteries and our Black cemeteries are just really important artifacts in and of themselves, archives in and of themselves of the information that we can use to bring back to the surface information about our important Black communities, about the important people in these communities, especially in, this time where, people are really hypersensitive and aware of the discrepancies, the systemic discrepancies as far as, urban planning and historic preservation. So being able to use things like cemeteries, the oral histories that we gather from the families and the individuals associated with these kinds of places, and encourage the use of that in as much as we promote, these higher level academic sources and issues and discussions. And it's just really important to incorporate these grassroots efforts and the stories from the people and the cemeteries themselves in our pursuit of equitable historic preservation and architectural history and understanding of these spaces and places.
And I would like to say that I would like to ask all the churches to consider having the secretaries to do more with preserving the history of those that is buried in the cemeteries, so that when people come that are looking for their family members, that we can find some records. I know the Catholic churches over decades have done a great job, but now we just need to broaden that perspective now and let it reach every denomination. And also to the family members, I certainly would like to ask you to please if you see that your family's graves are neglected, please do something about it and show love there. And also with the headstones, if there's not a headstone, please, family, come together and place a headstone up on that family grave. And for those of you that are organizing family reunions in the future, please make visiting the cemetery one of those parts of that reunion, so that the family can go out there and pay homage to the ancestors, and also make it a weekend where you can just say, hey, we're going to dedicate 1 or 2 hours to maintain the graves there.
I wanted to add that if you have a cemetery in your neighborhood and you would like to advocate for or help preserve the cemetery, reach out to your local historical commission, because every county has a historical commission and they have cemetery committees. So you can inquire with the cemetery committee as to what they're doing to preserve the cemetery in your area, or cemeteries in your area. And if they can also tell you that nothing's being done. And so that would be your way of figuring out if you need to put together a grassroots effort to preserve certain cemeteries in your area, because they have every county historical commission has a list of all the cemeteries in your area. Well, most of the time. And like I said, you can work with them to figure out what cemeteries need help.
Wonderful.
I think I'll add, and maybe I'm just thinking from the perspective of, just a young scholar, kind of really getting my feet into this new world for me anyway of preservation planning. Just really exploring what kind of technology can be used to preserve cemeteries. I've seen really high level examples of GIS being used for cemeteries just for something as simple as maintaining burial records. So really, you know, trying to, how can I, as a young scholar, fill the gap for a community church to improve their burial records? It can be simple technology, even just an Excel spreadsheet, you know, moving from this paper filing system to something that's on a shared computer, or, you know, just so it's accessible to more than one person. Because if we have just a notebook of all the burials, it's no use if it gets destroyed in a cemetery, in a flood, or a natural disaster, if it gets the simple techniques and practices to maintain, you know, burial records. And it just makes it a whole lot easier to know who's buried. And again, like thinking from a disaster, like, return this person, where do we put them? Are we reaching capacity for this cemetery? Do we need to buy more land and expand? So really just thinking of how can we move forward with advancing our technology just with maintaining burial records.
Y'all, I did all that asking for questions from the viewers, and I was about to let y'all go before asking the questions to y'all. But we have a few questions. So for Margaret Cook, she says, for those of us wishing to be allies for cemeteries, and I think actually, Deanna, you kind of touched on this a little bit. For those wanting to be allies for the cemeteries in their communities, what is the appropriate way to assist current caretakers, if they exist, without devaluing or disrespecting what they've invested so far, especially in cases where they haven't been able to keep up on the caretaking? So I will pose that to
Yeah, like I mentioned, definitely start with your local historical commission, because they'll be able to give you information as to what cemeteries exist and what their needs are. They also tell you information as to whether a certain cemetery has a cemetery society that's taking care of said cemetery. And so that's really where I would start. If you're interested in being an ally, start with your local county historical commission.
Awesome. Rosalind says, what efforts are any of the panelists engaged in to stop state agencies such as TxDOT, they're calling out Texas, from encroaching upon and obliterating African-American cemeteries to expand highways?
Let's put a hold on that. We got an announcement about that we're going to share.
Oh, okay. We will put a hold on that one. Let's see.
However, if anybody wants to talk preservation law in regards to that, Section 106, if anybody wants to mention that, who's on the panel, feel free to. I'm looking at you, Tara Dudley.
Oh, she's on mute.
I knew you were. Well, I mean, just in a nutshell, literally,
Right.
As far as Section 106, you know, when an entity like TxDOT, for example, since TxDOT was called out, but there are others, you know, when there is an undertaking, if you will, or any project that will involve federal funding, usually when we're talking about TxDOT, it's for the expansion of a highway. You are supposed to basically conduct a survey and find out if there are historic resources that are in danger of being affected by said undertaking or project. And what happens a lot of times is, you know, for whatever reason, you know, and entities like the Texas Historical Commission with their cemeteries programs have gotten better over the years about identifying and listing, and not having necessarily any kind of historic designation, because that's something different, but, you know, just identifying where the locations of these cemeteries are. But then we get to that problem where people don't know that there are cemeteries. And speaking for many years, I wore the hat of a preservation consultant, and still am, but working with a firm that would do these kinds of surveys for TxDOT. And so we're supposed to do due diligence and talk to the communities, look at records and other things that people may have, so that we're not affecting or that we're able to indicate in these documents, in these reports, these surveys that, hey, there's an African-American cemetery or Hispanic cemetery or any cemetery in a certain distance from where this project is being, is happening, so that, you know, that TxDOT or again, whatever agency has that information, and so that they're able to do the right thing and do the appropriate thing. The caveat to that is that as a preservation consultant, you know, we're only making recommendations. So TxDOT's gonna do, or whoever the client is, they're gonna do what they're gonna do. But, you know, we do have that literature, that information that is presented to them as a consultant. And so again, these, you know, these stories of so-and-so, grandma so-and-so, or whomever knows where a cemetery is, and being able to document this with oral history, with mapping, you know, and things like the Texas Freedom Colonies is doing with the mapping of freedom colonies. So we know where these cemeteries are, where they're potentially cemeteries, is really important. And so that's a way to avoid that, because, you know, having federal funding and with legislation, preservation law, by law, we're supposed to avoid being able, you know, affecting these kinds of cemeteries. Now, if it's something like a school construction or something that a private entity is doing, we get into different kinds of legislation. You know, Section 106 is only for in cases where federal funding is being used in a project. So.
Wow. That's the last question, because we're gonna do some announcements that will address a lot of the other questions. But I mean, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate all of you all being here with us today. Like, this is just really, really good, great. And I think that this conversation definitely will and needs to continue. So, Dr. Roberts?
I think that this definitely is what we would call part one, because this definitely has to continue. And with all of my fellow educators out there who are looking for ways to provide educational content via Zoom and are assigning videos, I think that you just got a free lecture. And I encourage everyone watching and listening to share this content as educational content with your classrooms. This is why we do what we do. We are really about connecting the dots between preservation and transportation, preservation and community empowerment, preservation and community development. All of these things are connected, and this show and my guests have been brilliant at making all of those connections crystal clear to our viewers and listeners. And I just want to say thank you before I say anything else. I'm so proud, and I'm so, I just feel so blessed to have had all of you on the show today. With that, we want to give all of you an opportunity, if you had specific announcements related to your projects, announcements that have to do specifically with events or ways that people can support your work or engage your work. We'd like to go around and have you announce that. And in the meantime, Jennifer will be pulling up the map. I hope she has share capabilities, but she'll be pulling up our atlas so that we can get ready to make some of our announcements momentarily. So can we start with maybe Deanna, you have any announcements?
Yes, so I actually do the research with a group of grad students at UT, and we are putting together a conversation surrounding necropolitics. The conference is titled Necropolitics and the Necropolis, Mourning, Remembrance, Reclamation, and Healing in the Latinx Communities. And we're doing a call.
Look at you.
Thank you. We're doing a call for anyone interested in being a part of the conversation. And it's going to center around Day of the Dead. It's in collaboration with Proyecto Teatro, which is a Austin-based theater group. And if you want to know more, please go to my blog, or go to the group's blog. It's reclaimingmemoriestx.org. .blog. And that's where you will be able to see all our updates. It's going to be a wonderful commemorative events at San Jose Cemetery. And there's going to be a lot of artists that are going to be doing pieces surrounding the necropolis and necropolitics. So it's really a wonderful event. So please come out and support.
And we will be sharing this information via our Facebook page for everybody to get more information and how you can be involved and attend.
Yes.
So stay tuned for that.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one other cemetery in St. Helena, Black Creek Cemetery, AME Church Cemetery. I will be recording that cemetery this fall and also updating that to the social media databases, as well as get ready for donating my yearly collection of what I have collected within the last 12 months to Southeastern University, and also that consists of a lot of obituary funeral programs. So that's what I'm working on now. So I'm using this time since COVID-19 to really do a lot of electronic updating and uploading to the internet, so that other people who would be just as happy as I would be if I found something about my ancestors on the internet. So I do want to share that.
Dr. Dudley?
Yeah, I have several projects that I'm working on that reflect a lot of the genealogical research that I've done tied into cemeteries. So a couple of conference presentations, virtual of course, this fall. I also would encourage folks who do want to get out to visit the Neil Cochran House Museum and see the slave quarters building there. We also have sort of an in progress exhibit up that encompasses a lot of the research that I and my students have done on that building and on some of the individuals enslaved and freed who would have worked on that site for the various individuals that own the property, that own the house at the time. The exhibit is called Reckoning with the Past. You can get a little bit of information about that if you go to the museum's website, and they are open, of course, with limited attendance. It's nchmuseum.org. And so you can find information about the exhibit there. And just a little bit of a sort of pre-promotion I have in sort of copy editing process. My first publication, my book on the New Orleans Free People of Color. It's going to be called Building Antebellum New Orleans, Free People of Color and Their Influence, and that should be coming out next late spring, summer with the University of Texas Press. And it talks about two families of color who were involved in the building trades, influencing the built environment of the antebellum city. And so a lot of the, again, genealogical research that I have done on free people of color in New Orleans is wrapped up into that work and publication. So stay tuned.
That is fantastic. So what I want to do now is, again, I want to thank our guests. They'll still be sticking around. They may have their videos off, but what we want to do now is answer some of your questions through some of the announcements we're going to make about Texas Freedom Colonies Project. Again, thank you to our guests. And I'm so, so thankful that you chose to share your knowledge and wisdom and passion with us this Friday morning. With that, I'm actually going to share my screen, and I'm about to show you a video about one of our new partners. We talk a lot about stories. We talk a lot about culture and memory, and that's a lot of what fuels our work. But what has fueled my work over time is a lot of what I see in the comments and the questions. How do we make change? How do we stop the destruction? How do we stop the injustice? And a lot of what we do here at Texas Freedom Colonies Project with my students who are working on our research team is we devise ways to raise awareness and we do research. And our research is aimed at systemic change. That is change at the root, not one by one, not emergency by emergency or reaction by reaction, but change at the root. And one of the ways that we're attending to that change, or able to do that, is being recipients in 2019 to the of the National Trust for Historic Preservation's African American Action Fund grant. With that grant, we have decided to focus on taking the Texas Freedom Colonies Project Atlas from its current prototypical space to one of being able to encompass the full range of services and needs of Texas Freedom Colonies. That is, a place for each community to have their own archive page. And most importantly, a way for us to develop a model for the best cemetery registry and information space for African Americans ever developed. And we're doing that in partnership with a cutting edge organization. They're called Root Cause Research Center. And with that, I'm going to share with you soon, in 1 second, I'm going to share with you an exciting look at the work of this unique organization called Root Cause Research Center.
The people most impacted by an issue are best positioned to discover the root causes and solutions of that issue. They are the ones with the first-hand experience, social context, insights, and networks that are necessary to fully unearth the whole story behind deep-rooted problems. The Root Cause Research Center works alongside and trains community members to investigate and report community concerns. We bring together impacted community members and train them in community organizing, research, and design, all to help them tell their own data stories to the public, to policymakers, and to other connected stakeholders. We partner with local grassroots leaders to launch community-based participatory research projects. We design inventive and interactive visuals that break down complex information for policy change. Because of our partnerships with impacted communities, the Root Cause Research Center can grab the problem at the root.
And so with that, I'm introducing to you our partnership with Root Cause Research Center based in Louisville, Kentucky, as well as Civic Data Alliance, who will be doing a strategic plan along with us on the next version of the Atlas and our website. And they'll also be developing in partnership with Jennifer Blanks, a way for all of you to upload, document, and assess the conditions of cemeteries that you come upon. A lot of people say to us, call Texas Historical Commission, call these people, call these people. Everyone is overloaded. And that's why we need a systemic way for people to feel they could do something right away. And so what we have allocated our funding toward, and we've already begun the process of, is developing a strategic plan, as well as we'll be testing on site with our settlements in East Texas, in Jasper and Newton counties. We'll be working with those communities to test out ways that we can assess and upload information from our phones, from iPads, and even on paper if need be, as we know about the digital divide. And so that's the next big project that we're doing with the Atlas. The Atlas has already played a role in addressing some of your problems and issues around protecting places. We've had people from the Council of Texas Archaeologists, from other archaeological and environmental assessment firms, say that before they even start a project, they do a desk review or desk audit using the Atlas to look at where there are freedom colonies. And that's why your involvement and your assistance with helping us locate that data is so very important. So with that, I want to go ahead and ask Jennifer to please bring up the atlas, and she's going to assist me with letting you know about some other ways that the atlas is attending to some of your questions, particularly around TxDOT. So the Texas Department of Transportation receives federal funding for projects, which are called undertakings, as Dr. Dudley said. And what we've decided to do here at Texas Freedom Ecology Project in phases is we had a meeting with TxDOT over the summer, and rather than, again, project by project, what we're actually doing is figuring out the ways in which Texas Freedom Colony descendants, whether you live there or not, will be aware of every single project that's about to happen in a timely fashion, not just with public notices within a year or 2 years, but 4 years out. So the first stage of that, if we could get a little more of a close-up, the first stage is that we have put projects underway onto the atlas. So that if you're looking at a blue dot, if you select any blue dot near a project, Jennifer, you will see a drop box that has information about that atlas location, right? And what you'll see in addition to that information nearby is you will see red lines that are showing you projects underway. And what that gives you a right to do is to contact TxDOT, particularly their outreach office, and say, I'd like to be a consulting party on this project. I'm a stakeholder. Do you have an address there? No, but I own property there, or I have community members there, or I go to church there, or my people are buried there. And you could state your right to be a stakeholder and to be notified and to have a role in developing a protection and mitigation plan for protecting the assets there. If you'll go ahead and select future TxDOT projects. Here we have future TxDOT projects. That means they're not yet underway. And this is where you have the greatest impact. Here, if you'll press any of the blue lines, and we're still, this is a work in progress, so we're showing you it's not yet perfected, but the blue lines are showing you where there are new projects. They're showing you where they're located, and they're showing you the county, the type of project, highway improvement in this case, the intersections involved. And so what we're aiming to do as we refine this is to be able to have freedom colonies on the offense, not the defense, when it comes to development around and through our communities. So we're not protesting after or once it's too late, but we're in communication and engaging TxDOT and other people engaged in development on the front end. That's why we do and how we do the research that we're doing. This is stage one of a multi-stage project that has to do with getting people the proper information to be fully engaged residents and stakeholders of freedom colonies. I also want to talk about a little bit about another project that we're doing that has to do with Landowners Association of Texas. And you can leave the map up because this is helpful too. You see different colors on the map. And Jennifer, would you mind explaining the different colors on the map?
Sure. So the red data points are data points provided by map users. So if you're just quickly looking at the atlas and you're a descendant of a freedom colony, but you don't see yours, you can just quickly click add to the map, and then you'll go through the process of adding a new data point. You'll include the name, the county, and just add it directly into the map. So that's one. The gold data points, those are data points provided by one of our surveys. The Black Settlement Survey is kind of longer, or it's the shortest survey, and so you'll go through the surveys, and if you click take the Black Settlement Study Survey here, in this survey, you're able to provide information such as the name of the freedom colony, the county, here we are, the county, your contact information if you're comfortable with sharing that, your status of residency if you live in the county. And then when you scroll to the end, you're able to upload any images and then place the data point on the map. And then,
when we ask you to share your story, this is how you share your story.
mhm.
And if you'll, yes, go ahead.
Sure. And so then the green data points are the storyteller surveys, and this is where you can provide even more information. As Scott mentioned, we have a lot of descendants say, oh, I don't really know much, but then we look at their surveys and it's literally like pages and so much information. So any information is good information. And so again, like you have the option to place the Freedom Colony directly onto the map and tell your story here. So what's the origin story? What's your family names, any traditions in your community, any reoccurring events? What kind of resources do you have to provide? Just this breadth of information that really fills our database in a powerful way. And then we have the blue data points, which are the data points that the research team we take time out to locate Freedom Colonies ourselves and then add it to the database and place it on the map as well. So we have multiple ways that we get information.
And so this is where we need you. And what do we do with all this data? Why do we have all this data? Because with the information of the stories, it's not just to be sentimental and feel good and say this is important, but because by knowing the descendant names, by knowing the family names and the institutions, we can then help to contact and empower those community assets and community groups so that when there's development, when there's a problem, we know who to find and who to locate. And so with the next version of the Atlas coming with donations, with more grants, with more support, and more team members and volunteers, we're going to be able to build out an incredible Atlas with pages dedicated to each and every settlement where people can interact and print out information and go on tours. But we can't do that without first working one-on-one with individuals who want to get involved. And so with that, we want to talk now a bit about our partnerships. We have an exciting set of partnerships through our Whiting Foundation grant. We're partnered with UT Arlington with Kate Holliday. We've got a lot of comments here from Margaret Koch from the Bullock Museum. We've got a partnership with TSHA, Texas State Historical Association, and with CTA, the Council of Texas Archaeologists. And we're all coming together around collecting stories and also talking about ways that we can make it easier for people to share their stories. And we're doing that through a number of upcoming events. But first and foremost, we're building an infrastructure to make it easy for you to do that. And that is the Adopt a County program. Skylar, can you tell us about the Adopt a County program?
Sure, I am.
While she's pulling up the page, the Adopt a County program is the way that we're getting community members concerned with, let's say, Milam County, as someone mentioned, who want to solely zero in on how we're going to find the remaining settlements. We have settlements where we know where they are. There's some we know the names, but we don't know where they are. We have sometimes names, location, and no story. So we are dedicated to success on this, not just haphazardly, just keep getting information, but finishing up counties. And she'll explain more about that.
Right. So with the Adopt a County campaign, it really is a participatory engagement program. And so we really want to hear your stories, and we want to get the information from you to be able to better tell the overall story and narrative of many of our Freedom Colony communities and the locations. And that will allow us to better advocate for your individual communities and Freedom Colonies as a whole. We are looking for volunteers to help us in a lot of different ways. We have a lot of different ways that you can volunteer with this program. One of them being an Atlas super user, which their main function would be to primarily work on adding data points and data sets to the Atlas and getting and expanding the map. of the communities. And we also, so those Atlas super users and different volunteers will help us to complete, quote unquote, complete the county. And as Dr. Roberts mentioned, a county is complete when all of the communities are located. And as you can see from this card here for Houston County in particular, we have a section where it says located Freedom Colonies. So there's 12 located, 12 points within the county that we know of, but we have 6 other names of Freedom Colonies that are said to be located in this area, but we don't have a data point location for them. So by going through different cultural resource surveys and different information, different oral histories and things that people have uploaded to the survey or to the atlas, that will help us to better identify these 6 locations. And this is just for this Houston County example.
Excellent.
And we need your help to do that. So there are a lot of different opportunities to help. You don't have to be a whiz at a map. You, if you're just willing and able to be
Send pictures. Let's say you have pictures. You have funeral programs. You're a church historian for a church in Houston County, and you look here and you go, I know where Smith Grove is. I know where Thankful is. I could tell them, why don't they have it on the map? Because we need you. And here's how you can help. You can scan those kind of materials and you can help us upload them to the map. Your stories, we even take audio files. That survey is the means by which we do that, but we're also going to do Facebook pages for each county so that you can build community around this activity. So can you tell them the different ways that they can reach us and sign up, Skylar?
Sure. So as to sign up for just overall communication with the project, email us at freedomcoloniesproject@gmail.com, and we will then respond with a link to a Google form, and that is where you can sign up for a county of your choosing. So if you have a particular county in mind that you have family from or that you have worked in previously, you can choose that county on the Google form, and then as we will instruct you, you can join the Facebook group and then begin to we'll have, quote unquote assignments, not really, you're not getting graded or anything, but we'll have different projects and things that each group can work on, and the search and uploading will begin. And so here is the link to the Google form there. Also, if you are on your computer and you have your smartphone in your hand, you can scan this QR code right here. Just turn your camera on and focus it onto the QR code, and in the link to the Google form will pop up at the top of your screen. Just click that and you complete it there.
And we're going to make each of these available after we talk today. We're going to be posting these in our chat group. We have a Facebook Atlas group, and on our Facebook page, and on our Instagram, so that if you're worried, I can't get that right now, or I'm not going to remember all this, we're going to make sure each of these pieces of information are separately posted here, as well as on our website, thetexasfreedomcoloniesproject.com. But here are even more ways that you can get involved. Tell us about the call for researchers, Skylar.
So as we've been saying, there are a lot of different ways that you can get involved, and you do not have to be in any kind of higher education program. We know that there are all types of different researchers, historians, as Dr. Roberts mentioned, church historians, planners, geologists, architects, community preservationists, community historians, and so we want all available help. And if you're willing and you want to be a part of the project, this is a way that we will be getting more people involved in preserving the Freedom Colony communities and expanding the reach of the Adopt a County program, and identifying locations and scanning in information and photographs. And so we'll be posting this different promotional material for different opportunities on our Facebook page. So We want to encourage you. At the bottom of this screen here, you can see all the ways that you can connect with us. We want to encourage you to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram. This is where we will be posting all of this information to to easily direct you to sign up for the project.
And we'll also be posting it on our website. So each of the different pieces, the presentation will be on the website. So you'll be able to take your time and read through these.
Right.
Along with the other things that we're working on, I just want to enumerate one more project, one more big partnership that we have with an exciting organization. If you could bring the map back up, Jennifer. The Landowners Association of Texas is an organization dedicated to the interest of Black farmers and landowners in Texas. Actually, all landowners of color, but predominantly African-American landowners and farm owners, whether you own an acre or 100 acres. And so we have been asked to assist, along with Texas A&M Law School, in providing resources that help people with land retention. And not just land retention, but you retain the land, but what do you do with it? How do you keep it? How do you protect it? And especially real estate planning. So while the law school is providing a lot of information, we're turning those into webinars that'll be on our website. We have preservation and land retention 101 information that we're posting to our website soon. And we're also, along with Landowners Association of Texas, doing workshops in East Texas on family conversations, on family stories that could help with understanding who's the heir, who are the multiple heirs, and how to have this communication well in advance of a crisis. We also, as part of that project, are doing a needs assessment survey. So Jennifer, if you could highlight the map or make the map larger rather, and I'd like you to just select the layer of the map that shows African-American population, if you could. So on our map, we have a number of layers and we're adding more, and we want, you know, if you're a GIS and map whiz and want to help us add more informative layers, bring them. We need that help, we need that support. But if you would just select the population, African-American, what she's doing is showing the 2010 census information.
It takes a while to load.
It does. And while she's loading that, that's all the more reason to remind everyone why it's so important for you to fill out the census. There's lots of people who still live in freedom colonies, and once this finally comes up, we're going to be able to see, and you'll see the shaded areas are showing you African-American population by census block group, which is the smallest level at which you could record the information. And the reason why we're showing this in relationship to talking about land retention is that too often we have land and we don't know where it is, and there's a lot of absentee land ownership. So our intention is to work in these communities to not only assess the needs of people there, but also to begin to map communities that maybe aren't on the map where there are clusters of landowners. And so that's the other piece that we're doing here, is looking at the patterns of where there are no longer African Americans, but there was once a thriving freedom colony. And so what the map is showing you in some of the shaded areas that are showing up right now is that there are places that are yellow that were all Black communities. But what we can see here is that there's no longer all Black census data, which would lead us to believe that census data doesn't tell us about African American interest, footprint, threats to our assets and our cultural assets if you only look at census data. So that's why it's so important for us to get out in the communities and do the need assessment. Due to COVID, we've slowed down the project a bit, but in the meantime, you have every opportunity to go to our website, to go to our atlas and fill in your story, to fill in your data, and to add to points that are already here, your stories and data. It's key to this being a success. While we're researchers and we're adding things daily, there's some information that doesn't exist in the Texas Historical Commission archives There's no marker for it. There's nothing. There's not pre-existing information. All that atlas data from THC and from Texas State Historical Association, we have it in the map. Without you, the public, we won't have a complete map. That's why it's so important that you contact us. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So Skylar, if you want to talk about any other opportunities or announcements.
Yes, I have one more thing I would like to share in relation to the adopted county. We'll be having a an online meetup slash orientation where we'll go into even more detail about what opportunities there are for you to volunteer with the project and exploring the atlas a little bit more. I know just looking at it, it may be a little bit intimidating to some, but I promise you it is going to be a breeze, and we will show you all that you need to know about utilizing all the functions and information and uploading information to the atlas. So on Friday, October 16th, we will be hosting a, in place of our coffee talk, we'll be doing like an orientation and online meetup with volunteers and just anyone who's interested in learning more about the project. And if you're kind of on the fence about volunteering with the adopted county, this will be the event that you want to come to so that you can solidify that you do want to be involved, because I know you all want to be involved.
I know you do. And I know a lot of you are saying, I want to fool with that atlas. Okay.
We got other opportunities.
Yes, I have a PhD, but I do code switch. And I know that some of you are saying, I don't want to fool with all that electronic stuff. I don't want to fool with the computer. I just want to give my story. I hear you. I hear your words. And so what we would ask you to do is to feel free to mail to us or to just request a paper and say, honey, just give me a paper copy of that survey so I can get it and pass it out and fill it out. Yes, we will do that. We will happily do that. So if we could show a screen that shows all the ways that people can contact us, that would be great. You can email us. You can do all sorts of things to help us. We're building an advisory board of people who explicitly want to get more involved in our planning, especially Freedom Colony descendants, because what we do, we don't do just because we decided. We do it because descendants asked us to do this work. Mm-hmm. You want to use our logo? You want to say that you're part of the project or using any of our methods? Please contact us first so that you can cite our work, cite our scholarship, which is everything we do. And of course, we have the opportunity, you can fill out a request form to learn more for speaking engagements. And we use the request form because we get tons of mail every day. And there is no Texas Freedom Colony's office. There is no team of people in a room waiting for your call. We are trying our best to get to all of the flood of requests we get every day. And so the request forms help us do that. So do you have the card that kind of shows the different ways that people can talk to us?
Yes, before I show that, I just want to remind everybody, this is a monthly event, so stay tuned to our Facebook for updates and announcements about our guests for the next upcoming coffee talk. And how to contact us.
Here we go. So you'll see this card. This is pinned to the top of our Facebook, and it's on all of our social media, and we'll post it on Instagram often, but it's showing you how to get to the atlas. So point to the top and you'll see that HTTPS ArcGIS address. That's a short little address that gets you directly to the atlas. You can find us on Facebook. There's our Facebook address. That's where we post a lot of news and have great conversation. And then stay connected follow our website, thetexasfreedomcoloniesproject.com. And then contact us by Gmail, freedomcoloniesproject@gmail.com. And we will get to you as soon as we can. We need your donations. We need your support. We desperately need more hands. We need more grant funding because what we're really trying to do here is not just a nice little storytelling project about Texas places that don't exist anymore. We're talking about free, African American spaces, about African American empowerment, about all of our empowerment. As we face down one of the toughest times in our history, we need the tools, we need the infrastructure to be able to attend to the far-flung diverse needs of African American communities. And so all of this mapping, all of this storytelling is we're not just doing it for its own sake or so we could just publish papers. This is so we can save our cultural, our financial, our economic assets, and we can save and preserve the stories that tell us how we created our own places, how we sustained our own places, and how we lost those places, and so that we can learn from all that and improve upon those models as we look towards the future. Skylar, anything else? Do we have other comments or questions?
Just one more thing. Our Instagram is not on this card.
Okay.
And I apologize for that, but it is, if you want to follow us on Instagram, it is freedom_colonies_project. So go follow us on Instagram. We share some great content about our community specifically that are featured on our atlas, and just different, it's just different content on there. So yeah, go follow us on Instagram. But that is all I have.
Great. Do we have Kendall? Do we have any more comments or pressing issues that have popped up on our page, on our Facebook page? We got Facebook Live comments, I know.
I am scrolling through right now and I don't see anything.
Okay, I see a lot of congrats and
Yeah.
people excited about the relationship and interested in helping, and people with Milam County Historical Commission and all kind of community groups. And an interesting point by Jennifer McWilliams saying, can you add or do you have enslaved population data by county? It's a really good idea. We really want to get not just data from 2010, that's most useful for a lot of current planning issues, but I think that would be a great, great project. So if you're a Texas A&M student out there, we got a lot for you to do. So you need to contact us.
They should
We
email
do have
us.
some internships. We do have some work opportunities, paid work opportunities and not. So if you're at Texas A&M and you're listening to this, you should be contacting us because we got opportunities for you. You could make a real difference. Anything else?
I think that's it. I mean, we had a lot to chew on from our
We did.
conversation. So
Yes. Yeah, and so we have exciting things going on all the time, every month. I know there's people, their wheels are turning and saying, what about this, what about that? Contact us, especially if you want to help us make change. We're about preservation, we're about education, we're about service, and we're about change, especially policy change and protecting what we have left of these communities. So join us. Thank you.